Hey there. Well, good. Somebody said hello. Y'all doing good today? Thanks for coming. I'm glad you're here. This is a historic event. This is the first public event for a group of leaders who have named themselves the Global Anti-Trafficking Alliance of Birmingham. And we're grateful that you're here to learn more about this significant need in our community and how these leaders are helping to meet that need and how you can be involved more effectively. My name is Kevin Moore. I'm the area director for Mission Increase Central Alabama, and we coach nonprofit organizations as part of what we do, and we also encourage collaboration, which is why I love what's happening today. Anything that's got alliance in their name, I want to be a part of it. So I'm also always glad when unity erupts in our community. And I also believe that Jesus is happy when that happens as well, because he's praying that we would be one, and then there's a big so that following that phrase, so that the world would know who he is. So there's a prerequisite to people knowing Jesus, and that's unity. So when you experience an event like this, where there's 5 different organizations coming together to help us all understand more about something that is so on the heart of Jesus, I think we need to stand up and say, we'll jump in on that too. So thank you for being here. Let me pray and ask God to bless our time. Father, you care about women in need. You care about children in distress. You care about orphans. You care about people who are in bondage and enslaved. You care about the nations. You care about people groups. You care about injustice. And we're so grateful that you do. Thank you that you have given us a calling to be your hands and feet in our world today. And God, I pray that as we enjoy this conversation today and the fellowship around the kingdom of Jesus, that Holy Spirit, you would be our teacher today, you would be our motivator today, that you would equip us to see the kingdom of Jesus come on earth just like it is in heaven. God, would you do your will through us today, and that you would bless in every way. Thank you for your presence here. Thank you for food that you provide. Thank you for friends, co-laborers in your kingdom, and the blessing of just being your children. We pray this in the name of Jesus. Amen.
Good afternoon, everyone. We're so excited to have you here today. My name is Jennifer Ludwig. I am another one of the GAAB members. However, unlike them, our experts here in human trafficking, I'm kind of like a lot of you. I'm a concerned citizen that wants to see a difference happen in our world and to end human trafficking. Because everything that we see, everything they've seen, it needs all of us to come together to make a change. So today we're very excited to have our 4 panel experts to tell you all about their field and what they are seeing in the world of trafficking. But before we get started, I do want to highlight our sponsors here today. So one of our sponsors is Cadence Bank. Cadence sent me this wonderful message they wanted me to read out to all of you guys. They said, Cadence is proud to be a sponsor and partner with organizations like GAAB. That have been strengthened to fulfill their mission. A collaboration between Cadence Bank and GAAB will extend existence even further because Cadence Bank believes in investing and helping in communities where our customers and our teammates live, work, and play. Cadence Bank is committed to community, is a large part of who they are because Cadence Bank knows strong communities sustain their company. Cadence Bank is passionate about helping people, creating strong communities for generations to come. And they wanted to thank you all for being here today and allowing them to be a part of this event as well. And our other sponsor for today is Chick-fil-A Cahaba Valley, that wonderful food you all there are enjoying. And we all know about Chick-fil-A, but what I want to tell you about is about this particular owner. So Jerry was at our last cause conversation, and he saw our group, and he kept looking back, and I thought it's because he knew Wellen, and he did. But I reached out to him afterwards, said, hey, would you be interested in partnering with us? Within this, 24 hours, he emailed me twice, called me twice before I had even returned his call, set all of this up for you guys, and he said, please let me be a part of this event. Oh yes, he definitely deserves a round of applause. At his last location, there was some exploitation happening across the street, and he would see it every day. And he said he was brought to tears, and you could hear his voice crack. You could hear the pain in his voice, and he was just like, how can I help? What can I do? And he made a commitment to himself and God that wherever he could, if God brought people to him in this arena, then he wanted to stand beside them and help them. So hence why he made all this happen before we even talked. But he's got a heart for it, and we're very excited to have Jerry and Chick-fil-A Cahaba Valley sponsoring us today. All right. So we are here today because alliance collaboration is what's going to help us end human trafficking. You know, we all aren't going to be like these people up here, but if we all do something, whatever we feel like God is calling us to do, that is where change starts to happen. When we come together with God, with these experts, and you do what you can, when you can, where you can. Every little bit helps. But anyways, shifting over a little bit more to my wonderful panel, a little background on trafficking. It is estimated that 50 million people are trapped in human slavery today. That number has increased by 25% since conflicts going on in the world, COVID, and the climate crisis. Many of you came here today to learn about human trafficking and how to take courageous steps to end this exploitation. Global Anti-Trafficking Alliance Birmingham, or we like to call ourselves GAAB, was formed just about a year ago. And it happened when several of us were working in our own little spaces and realized, where is this hub that these international groups, national groups, and local groups can come together, especially in introducing it to our Birmingham community. So GAAB was formed to get that alliance, and Kevin was a huge part of that, bringing us together and helping us kind of form ourselves. And this is our first official panel, but we hope it's one of many more. And the idea is, how can we share all of their amazing work, and how can we all come together to end human trafficking? So, next, let's go over and meet our panelists. So, we have got we'll start on the end. I'm going to ask you a question in a second, but I'm going to introduce you. Over here, we've got Alex Hill. Alex Hill is Senior Advisor of Strategic Partnerships at A21. If you've not been to A21's website, there's a link there. It is so informative. Their videos are amazing. Everything is. I'm a huge fan of their website if you want to know anything about human trafficking. Next to him is Alexa James. Alexa James is the Executive Director and CEO of Blanket Fort Hope. Blanket Fort Hope is currently building a rehabilitation, is that the right word? Restoration home for trafficked children. So they are closing in. If you follow them on Facebook, you'll see how far along they're getting. We're very excited for this to open one day and them to be able to start serving these children that right now have very few places to go. Next to her is Wellen Bridgers. Wellen Bridgers is the U.S. Director of Moana Villages. I won't go into her story, but they do a lot of orphan care, and her journey to get there is probably the most fascinating part. She's got 2 children that are adopted, and through that process, she realized that there was definitely corruption in that arena, and she wanted to see how she could help. And that is some of the work of what Moana Villages does. Next to her is Audrey Moore. Audrey is the CEO of Lift Up the Vulnerable. They work in war-torn countries in Sudan and South Sudan and do some pretty incredible work. I think they're serving over 1,000 people, but she will go more into that in a minute. But let's learn a little bit more about them. So I'm going to start with Alex. Can you briefly tell me about your organization's mission and where in the world you're working?
Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. So A21, our main mission is to abolish slavery in the 21st century. We're in 21 different countries, 19 different offices. I cover the southeastern states for A21.
Okay. Alexa James, same question. Tell us briefly about your organization's mission and where in the world you're working and serving.
Good almost afternoon, everyone. So I had mine written down so I'd stay on point, because I get off point so long. So Blanket Fort Hope is an agency that serves child survivors of human trafficking ages 12 to 18, with a step down to include ages 19 to 21 through our child placement agency license, which we have applied for, and we're also applying for our group home as well. These kids will have an option of college and tech school along with our partners at Big Oak. We believe in restoration and hope for every child survivor through access to trauma and essential services and education, compassionate care, and loving Christian witness. We also have a very, very strong educational component that offers CEUs. Our 10-bedroom restoration home will be complete this fall. It's beautiful. You can go online and see all the pictures. And then we will open early 2025. And then through our foster care initiative training, we really like to share this. Over the past 4 years, we've been able to train foster families and turn their names into DHR through our approved training through the state. And we've been able to help place over 25 kids through that program by turning in these names to DHR. We actually had a child that was placed the night of our gala through from Montevallo through a problem. So it's not enough, but we're getting there. Oh, Alabama is where we serve. It's in the United States. But yeah, we will help kids from other places also. You know, if there's children who are part of this, you know, coming to our country, they're unidentified, then we'll help those children as well as best as we can.
That is wonderful. Thank you, Alexa. And little background, Alexa's kind of been in this fight from at least the beginning that Alabama started recognizing this. So she's a wealth of information to learn more about what's happening here in Alabama. Next is Wellen Bridgers. So tell us briefly about your organization's mission and where in the world you're working.
Hi. So Moana Villages, we are an organization that provides refuge to orphaned and vulnerable children in the Republic of Congo. But part of our role, we're also a U.S. 501c3 nonprofit, is to help us all understand what ethical orphan care means and looks like, to support that work practically that is happening in Congo.
Wonderful. Audrey Moore from Lift Up the Vulnerable. Tell us a little bit about your organization's mission and where in the world you're working.
Thank you. So Lift Up the Vulnerable, we also go by LOVE, L-U-V. We work to prevent human trafficking. So our focus is helping children and women who are most vulnerable through protection, education, and economic development opportunities before they have to experience the trauma of trafficking. We have survivors in our network, but our main priority is prevention. And the work that we're doing, we wanted to stand with children and women, especially in war-torn countries, because they often, especially in the case of Sudan and South Sudan, have nowhere to go for help. The government is often complicit, and so this is an opportunity to provide the essential services for livelihood and then towards empowerment and thriving so that these kids and women can become agents of change in their communities.
What's so amazing about what Audrey is doing, if any of you have ever been to Sudan, I lived there for a little while, and there weren't organizations like hers out there. Women were often seen as cattle or property and traded and swapped and all sorts of things. So to have this organization that is focusing on women and children is truly remarkable in such an incredible country. Up next, we're going to go a little bit over myths versus realities of human trafficking.
And this is where you come in. This is an opportunity for you to answer some questions about what you know about human trafficking. And we're going to go all around the world. Some of you may know some things about trafficking locally. Maybe have even had some experiences, but because we're a global effort, we want to shed light on all the different ways that trafficking is taking place around the world. So I'm going to ask you a series of questions, and you get to name to me if you think they are a myth or a reality. and I'll share a little bit from an organization called Polaris on their response, and then we're going to see what our panelists think, if we're all in alignment or not. So, myth or reality number 1. Human trafficking is always or usually a violent crime. Is that a myth or reality? Unanimous? Panelists?
Well, I would have to say that in Alabama, we do a lot of training through the Alabama Human Trafficking Summit, and we get trained through OLEA, the Alabama Law Enforcement. And one of the things that they have recently trained us on was pimps known as guerrilla pimps here in our state, and they do kidnap, beat victims into submission. They even burn them, they gang rape them, and they keep them locked up or contained once they are serving clients. These guerrilla pimps are the most violent and brutal of all traffickers in the United States. So I haven't personally seen any of that. They have seen a lot of that movement coming up in Florida. So I think we just need to be aware that we could be, because y'all deal with that, I know.
Yeah. Anyone else have anything to share?
I'll share on a different end, perhaps, of the spectrum that for what we have seen, trafficking can look like anything, and it can look under the guise of what would seem to be a good situation. So primarily in the world of adoption, and specifically of international adoption, trafficking can happen within Christian adoption agencies, within Christian families who are believing that they're doing, a good and wonderful and noble thing. Meanwhile, there's a family in another country that even non-violently has been exploited and found themselves in a situation where their child is being adopted and not necessary. So sometimes it is legal and just comes from a real lack of awareness of what the real situation is.
Alex, you want to share?
Yeah, I would say kind of myth and fact, where myth as in it doesn't have to be violent, because we see a lot of online grooming. That is, I think, the biggest thing that's happening here in the States is a lot of online grooming. And so it starts off as very befriending, preying on the vulnerable, the weak, but then it does turn into violence.
Yeah, thank you. So what Polaris will name is that in the USA, the most pervasive myth is that your child is going to be kidnapped from the streets, and that's not often what we see. In reality, most traffickers will use psychological means, such as tricking or defrauding or manipulating or threatening victims into providing commercial sex or labor. In war-torn countries like Sudan and South Sudan, that is the norm, where it is the psychological means or economic means that people are trafficked. But there's also this reality that violence is ever present, especially in war-torn and conflict-ridden zones. So for the kids that are in our program, for Lift Up the Vulnerable's sake, many of them have lived through raids on their villages where if the people weren't taken into slavery, they were killed. So it was a mixture of a lot of trauma that led their families to be trafficked, or them. But I would say most of the kidnapping as means of adoption, also from Welland's point of view, and in South Sudan, is also a reality for many people in the world. All right, myth or reality number 2, all human trafficking involves sex. Look at you all go. Anyone want to name with your experience?
Well, we know, one thing I want to make a point, because I think this is a good thing with Polaris, is if a victim is 18 and under, there does not have to be proof of force, fraud, or coercion. If it's over 18, they do. So I think that's really important to know. There's labor trafficking, sex trafficking, and organ trafficking that happens. So I think that's very important to know. And there's not always the labor trafficking and sex trafficking, most of the time not, but occasionally there is sex trafficking with labor trafficking at night after they have finished working. And so I think that's important for people to know. There's actually a ring that they shut down in Shelby County on a construction site where there was labor trafficking, and at night they were expecting to be informed.
According to the 2021 report from the International Labor Organization, in 2021 there were almost 50 million, 49.6 million people living in modern day slavery, of which 27.6 were in forced labor, and 22 million were in forced marriages. So forced marriages, child brides, is a form of trafficking also that some of our organizations address. And of the 27.6 million people in forced labor, 17.3 were being exploited in the private sector, 6.3 were forced in commercial sexual exploitation, 3.9 were forced in forced labor imposed by the state. Example like China and having prisoners work. Women and girls account for 4.9 million of those in forced commercial sexual exploitation, and for 6 million of those in forced labor in other sectors, so other economic sectors. What is labor trafficking? Because it's something we often hear about sex trafficking, and we don't often hear about labor trafficking. What do you know about labor trafficking, or what are some forms of labor trafficking that you're aware of?
A new job, a new opportunities, if you just have the thing on this time, you get there, that's not what it's about.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
Recent articles in AL.com have exposed the fact that it's happening within our prison system in the state of Alabama.
Mm-hmm.
Prison numbers, making about 50 cents an hour tasks, and I think that they use it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's right. Any other ideas you want to share? Labor trafficking can be found in domestic workers, and house cleaners, and nannies, and restaurants, and construction, farmers, in mining. There's gold mining enterprises in Sudan, and many children are forced or conscripted to work there, factory workers, and child soldiers. So where there's conflict, child soldiers are also conscripted. Any of you have any experience in your networks for child labor trafficking, not related to sex trafficking?
The only ones that we've been in contact with is in Shelby County, there was 15 kids were brought in for it. I think there's more labor trafficking here in Alabama and the United States that we don't know about because we don't want to look at it.
Yeah.
You know,
Yep.
like you guys, I know, y'all, you see it more, I think, and so I think because we turn our head just the sex trafficking, that's it.
Yeah.
They can get kids working in spas and things.
Yeah. You want to say anything?
I would say, I know, kind of feeding off of that, labor trafficking that we see, like for instance, Cambodia, would be a lot of these scam call lines. That's really big. Here, we see a lot of agriculture, manufacturing. Let's say that's what we see. But kind of another statistic, kind of off trafficking. I know South Carolina reported that over 80% of their reported trafficking situations are minors. 80% in South Carolina. Yeah.
All right, myth or truth number 3. All commercial sex, now this is a little bit nuanced, so a little bit different than the first one. All commercial sex is human trafficking. Myth? So where there is an exchange of money, yeah. Yeah, I got you. Okay. So this is one that Polaris will say, all commercial sex involving a minor, which is what you've named, under the age of 18 is legally considered human trafficking. Commercial sex involving an adult is human trafficking if the person providing commercial sex is doing so against his or her will as a result of force, fraud, or coercion, which are the 3 key elements for naming human trafficking. However, it's important to note that various studies name a staggering 65 to 90% of those engaged in commercial sex by choice have reported experiencing child sexual abuse. So that's an interesting correlation for the commoditization of one's body. Do you, any of you want to name anything else about that?
Well, we do know the Department of Homeland Security did a study and found out that $110 million was spent in the greater Birmingham area on sex every year, which is a huge number. And I would like to speak into the prostitution thing. We know that no child ever chooses to do this ever. And as adults, I have had the privilege of interviewing to over 200 adults, and you were right. I mean, I saw it firsthand. I hate for us to even call it prostitution because what woman is going to choose to do that? There is a reason: sexual abuse at home, drugs, alcoholism, even maybe being sold for rent at some point in their life. So I think we have to be so careful when we use those words. And I love that you brought that out.
I was going to mention too that what we see in our community is this is a little bit of what you referred to, like said, that the inextricable link between poverty and prostitution. We have many women that have been in our care or that we have helped to keep their families together who have prostituted themselves because they truly do not know how they're going to feed their children or themselves. Or they have been forced into it by family members, and it is there's no option.
And they may believe it's the only thing they know.
Right, which is why that economic support and that the training, the offering of jobs is so critical for moving someone into a place of economic stability. Also allows them to not be put in those situations.
Yeah. Excellent, thank you. All right, myth or truth number 4, traffickers target victims they do not know. Myth. The reality is that much of the world, many survivors have been trafficked by romantic partners, including spouses, and by family members, including parents. So what is your experience? And I think you have some statistics for Alabama.
60%. Studies with Department of Homeland Security and DHR is familiar family trafficking in our state. So it is the families. Those are cases when a child is young as 4 years old that the dad was prostituting the son of his friends. And there's been civil cases where moms were trafficking their children because their parents wanted them to have sex with them while the mom was having sex. So 60% is a huge number when you dive down and that family is really for rent, for drugs, or just because. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, thank you. Did y'all hear that?
The old men in the room can't hear you.
So 60% of all victims in our state is done through familial trafficking or family trafficking, basically.
Do you want to share anything?
Definitely feeding off of that. I know part of, we have 3 steps at A21. The first one's REACH. We came out with the K through 12 curriculum, and it was in its test pilot stage. Just came out of it last year. But we made over 15 arrests, and 10 of those arrests were strictly from a family member selling their kid.
Myth or reality number 5, only women and girls can be victims or survivors of sex trafficking. Great. Men and boys are certainly also victimized by sex traffickers. LGBTQ boys and young men are seen as particularly vulnerable to trafficking right now also. Human trafficking can really happen to anyone, but some people are more vulnerable to exploitation. What do you think makes people vulnerable to being exploited? Can you give an example of a circumstance?
Mothers and families stuck in the scarcity, thinking that they can't make other cycles, that they have to use the children is what we see.
Yeah.
And it's sad, but it's, I
poverty is where most states
Yeah.
when they're in like a situation to change or will not change. So those are the people that we most try to connect with resources to let them know that they can change, things can change, things like this.
Great. What other risk factors do you know about? Poverty being a big one that she named.
Loneliness or isolation.
Mm-hmm. Any others?
An outcast in the community, like LGBTQ, people were saying
Mhm.
about the young boys that are transgender, girls that are transgender, that they're very isolated and cast out from the community.
Mm-hmm. Orphans and runaway youth, so children without a family support system like that are more vulnerable. That's right. Any other thoughts?
People with low self-esteem,
Yeah,
and then you have somebody who's making them feel good about themselves.
that's right. Yeah.
I would add to, a little bit on the flip side, children that are seen as a commodity. We see in our community that newborn trafficking is prevalent, and we have NICU nurses, labor and delivery nurses at public hospitals that will tell parents that their child, died, and then that baby is trafficked because a healthy newborn baby is seen as a commodity, either for, a family seeking adoption, I use in air quotes because I guess a trafficking situation, or even as dark as for witchcraft practices, that child has value and is seen as a commodity.
In Sudan, South Sudan, girls are kidnapped because of the future dowry the family will receive. So that's also part of it. So,
I'd like to add one more thing
yeah,
if I
please.
can. Another thing, with, we're talking about the LBGT community, we're seeing kids as young, little, 8, 9, 10, who are being pushed into this, but Christian families, and I think this is important that we talk about, because of their belief system, are kicking their kids out of the home. And when they do that, these kids are couch surfing is what they call it. And a lot of it is males, boys. And so they end up, just like you all said, looking for love in all the wrong places and having to survive. And survival sex is one of the things that they have to do. And we are seeing a huge uptick in boys by 30% here because of this identity crisis that we're having. And so don't think the hospital issue's not happening here too. I mean, it's crazy, but that's why training is so important, with the emergency rooms and hospitals, so they understand what they're looking at.
additional risk factors include recent migration or relocation, people that are on the move, and that's why with climate crisis, that's why the increase of trafficking globally has been on the rise. Substance abuse, mental health concerns, which you mentioned, involvement with the child welfare system, and being a runaway or homeless. Traffickers identify and leverage their victims' vulnerabilities in order to increase dependency. Myth or truth number 6, human trafficking only happens in illegal or underground industries. Myth. Human trafficking cases have been reported and prosecuted in industries including restaurants and cleaning services, construction, factories, and more, and we named some of those already. Myth or truth number 7, human trafficking involves moving, traveling, or transporting a person across state or national borders. Mostly myth, but maybe not known. Some not known. What do you all know?
I would say it's a myth.
I would have to say the same thing, because a child does not have to be moving it to be trafficked. A kid could be living at home and being trafficked by the boyfriend.
Yeah.
And I mean, we've seen that happen before. And, like somebody was saying, social media is killing us. You don't know who that you're falling in love with that will threaten you to maybe living at home, include your parents, your sister or brother, so they can go do what they want to do. And then sneaking out in the middle of the night doing this kind of stuff. And then, of course, when you're trafficking.
Human trafficking is also often confused with human smuggling, but they are distinctly different. And human smuggling involves crossing illegally crossing borders. But the crime of trafficking does not require any movement whatsoever. So survivors can be recruited and trafficked, like we've named, in their own hometowns and even in their own homes. And that's why it's such a complicated process that it takes an army of people to address, because it's everywhere and everyone's issue. Yes? I don't have the data on that. Do you, A21?
I don't have that specific, I don't.
Mm-hmm.
But usually if you're being smuggled, you have a debt you have to pay.
Somewhere, yeah,
Yeah.
that's right.
I think it's maybe worth pointing out that we emphasize this word ethical so much because ethical and legal are not necessarily interchangeable. There can be legal international adoption, for example, wherein it is an unethical situation because a child has been adopted that there is no real need to, that the family is perfectly capable to care for, to support. And so sometimes just saying, well, this is legal makes us feel better, but that's not necessarily reflective of the reality of either the family of origin or adoption agencies' work can still be unethical even if it's legal.
Thanks.
Yeah, and I want to say that's really good. That's great information. Thank you for sharing. One of the other things too is smuggling and the debt bondage could be an issue. Use my mic. Sorry. Hello, is that better? So I usually am so loud. Sorry. Smuggling is where I was at, right? So the debt bondage is so bad that even when they send these kids out to sell drugs as well, and then they end up getting caught up with the police department, and so they end up hating the police because their pimp comes back out and get them, and then they owe more debt because of that. So it's just every move that they make, and they send them deeper into this debt bondage. That it's just it's a cycle they never get out of, and one we don't talk about.
Myth or truth number 8, and it's a little linked to one we've done before, but labor trafficking is only or primarily a problem in developing countries. Myth, very good. So labor trafficking, of course, occurs in the United States and in the developed countries, but it's reported at lower rates here than compared to sex trafficking. The Asia and Pacific region has the highest number of people in forced labor, so it is a reality outside of the United States, of course. And Arab states has the highest prevalence of labor trafficking. And for each of us living in the United States, being aware consumers and aware of the supply chains, that the clothing to the food to the resources that we're purchasing, that is one really significant way to address human trafficking and our personal choices and our purchasing power. And that we have another alliance member that's part of the Freedom Business Alliance, and so you can also look up their website. They have a lot of really great information about ethically sourcing goods because it's critical. That's another step that we can each take and have power to take
Can I add
as
one
individuals.
thing to that, the
Yes,
purchasing? So like something just as small as this, as us being buyers here in the States. So we'll start off with shrimp. Over 85% of the shrimp that we buy in our local market, Walmart, Kroger, the fresh market, is being trafficked. It is from some type of trafficking form. Yeah, coffee, yeah. So something that we don't even think about, like shrimp, coffee, chocolate.
So the people that bring in their traffic, I mean, they're literally people that are harvesting the shrimp already.
Yeah, the ones on the boats being worked are against their will. They're against their will, yeah. Yeah. Over 85%.
It sounds like that's something the government needs to step in on.
Hear, hear. We've been screaming that now for a long time. It would be nice.
Food is required to have its food label of origin. So if you see made in Alabama on your Gulf shrimp, likelihood of trafficking almost zero. And that's the way the government has gotten involved in food.
I don't know. Do you have other data on that? Like, is that accurate? Like, how does?
That
Uh-huh.
on it, yeah.
I was going to ask where we can get, do you have resources where we can go to educate ourselves?
I can get that.
Great.
When I think in the United States too, that it's such an overlooked problem because we don't have the resources, people don't want to look at it, and also the lack of training and identifying. And I know when I was telling you about this trafficking case in Shelby County, it had happened in other cities, local, and the police departments knew about it, and this is from a police chief, but they didn't want to talk about it, and they did not talk about it or even identify it as such because they didn't want their cities to think that they were unsafe. So we're hiding the problem, and we don't, and our government and our city officials, they don't want to talk about it because they don't want people to think it's happening in their city because election is more important than the child that's being trafficked. So we've got to have a voice.
It's really great that cosmetic industry, has been locked up. All this highlighter and people that do that, putting all that out. That is free of mind, and like I said, not about children. There's actually a company, it's called beautycounter.com, and I use a lot of their makeup and their skincare because they actually have a chain that they look and they make sure that there's no children involved in their makeup production, farming and everything. And they look at their supply chain down to, and everyone in their supply chain has to answer for that. They constantly keep a check on it. Did you say beauty counter? It's beautycounter.com. They have the best makeup and skincare.
And I think this is really important to, it's not all bad news. More and more there are companies that have ethical standards and they're more and more available. It just takes our intentionality and our willpower to change our purchasing behavior, which is a hard thing to do. So if we take some intentional steps and incremental steps to change our purchasing power, money drives human trafficking. And so money will also be a part of the solution in how we purchase. Myth or truth number 9, people in active trafficking situations always want help getting out. Myth, and this is a complicated one because it's the psychological factors behind how human trafficking and exploitation is so effective. Every trafficking situation is really unique, and self-identification as a trafficking victim or survivor happens along a continuum. Some people don't self-identify as in slavery. Fear, isolation, guilt, shame, misplaced loyalty, and expert manipulation. People that are really good at pimping or trafficking in some method are experts at manipulation. And they're among many of the factors, and economic, where to feed my family, I must do this to survive and help them survive. All of these help keep people from seeking help or keep them from accepting the help that's offered to them when it is. Any of you have anything you want to share about that?
We see, someone mentioned the cyclical nature of that. We see in the orphan care world, there is a really identifiable cycle, that, and part of that is the mental, a child who has lost one or both parents, is lacking in appropriate developmental, appropriate connection, all kinds of things that build scenarios where there's poor mental health, and then there's also, economic vulnerability, and so you find yourselves in prostitution. Well, then all of a sudden you're pregnant, and there's no father in the picture, and you may give your child. And then that child grows up without a parent. Like the cycle, it's cyclical, and so part of that focus is breaking that cycle. And a big piece of that is the mental health piece of how can we address the trauma that is that's present and provide some means for. And someone else mentioned about the shame, that link of poverty and shame. It's complicated.
Well, and most children do not self-identify as being trafficked, and they don't even know a number to call. And so they've either fallen in love with somebody, and they end up being trafficked, and they think it's their fault, or it could also be a situation like you talked about where it's horrible poverty reality here, and even in elemental, we've seen it, where a child is, even 8 or 9 years old, and there's a pimp or a drug dealer out on the street leaning against the Trans Am. So you want to go home where your mother's either out in drugs or she's been prostituted and men coming in the house and you're at risk, or would you rather choose the guy with the Trans Am? So they're not recognizing what they're choosing, and they're just looking for a better way. And I think we've got to start understanding that with our children.
Yeah, can I add on top of that? So, we know that the average age is 11 years of age when the average person is being trafficked, the average victim. And to me, kind of what you're talking about earlier about vulnerability, if we just go back when we were all growing up, 11, how vulnerable we are. And I mean, think about it today, if I walked by any one of y'all in the hallway and just said, oh, I like your shirt, it's automatically going to let your guard down around me, even though you don't know me from Adam. But you're like, as grown adults, if you see a stranger that pays you a compliment, how more receptive you are to listen to what they have to say. So then we put that at the average age of 11, they're transitioning, we don't know what's going on in their home life, but at the same time, social media, what they have to be like to fit in. I mean, it breaks my heart just knowing that's what's going on in our schools. I mean, but it is. The average age is 11, and the vulnerability is there.
Is that average age in the U.S.?
Yes, ma'am.
Well, and I think too that one of the things officers, and I think this is so important, I'm sorry, we did a video where we gave a scenario of a girl that was a cheerleader, because this was an actual case at some point a long time ago, and there was a guy that kept coming to the ball games just to make himself familiar, and so he'd walk down and people start talking to him, hey, how you doing? And he'd just hang out, by the fence, and hey, bud, how are you doing? And the girls would be waving at him, and this went on the whole time. And so he eventually befriended the cheerleader and got her to start going out on dates with him. Her grades started failing because he started making her perform, and he wanted to take her away and take her on trips, and the only way they could do that was for her, and he gave her drugs the first time, and so she lived in shame at that point, didn't even want to go back home. And it really is that simple, because just by natural maturation, we are vulnerable, and we are all, I remember even at 13, we all look for somebody to say we're pretty or we're loved, and that's just a natural thing. So with social media, giving our children a cell phone is like giving them a gun, in my opinion. And so they're open. The pornography has just gone out the window, promoting this. They talked about that at the summit where they had an 8-year-old and a 10-year-old boy on the line that they were talking about. One of them was homeschooled, but had got so addicted to pornography that he almost killed himself. And that was, he was being homeschooled and knew how to still find those porn sites because of one pop-up. And nobody knew about it.
Our pediatrician shared with me that I live in Mountain Brook, and our over the mountain community, by 13, 95% of children have been exposed to pornography. It is terrifying.
Myth or reality? Adoption is usually in the best interest of the child. Different answers. So according to the UN Special Report on Illegal Adoptions, there is no reliable data on the number of children who have been or are being adopted as a result of being sold, trafficked, or subjugated. Reliable figures are difficult to establish because sometimes they're cloaked in legal processes, which Wellen will share more about in a moment. But adoptions result from crimes such as abduction. Sudan, South Sudan families can be walking down the road and a tribe of traffickers will come and take all the children for adoption practices. They can be used for sale of and trafficking in children, fraud in the declaration of adoptability, falsification of official documents or coercion, and any illicit activity or practice such as lack of proper consent of biological parents, improper financial gain by intermediaries, and related corruption. All of this can be wound up very intricately with the adoption process. Why don't you share a little bit more about that?
It's one thing to have the language for it. It's another thing to be able to name individual, by names and faces of every single thing that Audrey just listed. It happens. And Jennifer referenced, I'll share super, super briefly why we got into this. I grew up here in Birmingham, thought I would adopt, set out my husband and I to adopt with a Christian agency, and we're at the very end of the process to bring home twin boys when we learned that everything we had been told about their social history was a lie. They had parents who were married, they had teenage sisters who, we both worked at the time in Fairfield, and know that there can be perfectly suitable teenage siblings that can raise children. There was nothing indicating adoption for these boys, and we were not very naive people, and yet we almost brought home these children that in my mind may not have been legally trafficked, but certainly was an unethical adoption situation. And what we learned was this is not unique to any particular adoption agency. This is not unique to any particular country. It is a predictable pattern and model, primarily because there's money involved. And when you're working in countries where you have vulnerable populations that are operating in survival mode, and money is involved in adoption, you think about all of the different people that impacts, from orphanage directors to caregivers to judges who are deciding where to place children, to police who are finding children that can be adoption candidates, to attorneys in countries. Adoption agencies take fees for adoptions. In my opinion, it is a broken model because money is tied to it, and I don't think it has to be this way. But so often, even in our own churches, we are told adoption is the solution. Maybe not even so, what's the word I'm looking for? Explicitly, but just this insinuation of if we really care about the vulnerable, if we really care about orphans, we'll adopt. Right. And, there currently are not enough checks to ensure that when adoption happens, and absolutely sometimes adoption is the right path for that child. I am a mom of 2 out of my 4 kids are adopted. But to ensure that that only happens when it's necessary involves a lot more, and involves us to be aware and put our money where places are doing it differently. Share with our friends who are are interested in adoption. We have to do our due diligence. Mic drop. Oh, well, I was a rebellious 7th grader who wanted to take French instead of Spanish, and so we were invited to be part of a pilot program with this adoption agency, and I basically was their translator for 4 years through all kinds of different things, which gave me a really unique glimpse into how partnerships form between adoption agencies and orphanages. And through that kind of glimpse, we started to see a little bit of odd things happening. We were supposed to get photos every month. We had gotten photos in 4 months, and then it came out, the lie was that these children had been kidnapped by a man claiming to be their birth father. The reality was they had been back with their family for 4 months by the time that we were, actually told. So again, we were sending $500 a month for their care. There was a financial incentive on everyone's part for these children to be in an adoption scenario. And I think when their parents, saw how far down the line it had gotten, they took their children. The mother was a caregiver at the orphanage, so she lost her job. I mean, this is a family who was brave enough to actually take their children out of this situation to their financial loss. You can imagine how more often it does happen where you've got a vulnerable mom who is coerced into signing a paper she doesn't know what's going to happen, or she's told her child will go be educated in the United States and come back to provide for the family at 18. And this is all legal. I mean, this is what happens in international adoption situations.
Are there any countries that are better or worse internationally, number one? And number two, do any adoption agencies have any
That's a great question. I'll take the second half because unfortunately, unfortunately, so all international adoptions have to be done through what's called a Hague accredited adoption agency today. That, in my mind, does not ensure that there is only ethical adoptions happening. You still have to keep in mind that I don't know of an adoption agency that is not receiving money from more adoptions that are happening. And of course, I mean, the social workers have to be paid. I think there could be a different way, but when you are tying, financial gain to it, so they are certainly trained on Hague. The Hague Convention is the governing body of international adoptions. HAGUE. So the framework is there for there to limit unethical adoptions. What happens is, this is happening. A Hague accredited agency works with a Hague accredited country, and so there theoretically should be only ethical adoptions happening, but in reality what's happening in this survival mode country, Uganda for example is a Hague accredited country, you still have children that are coming into the orphanage and they're still, how does one actually verify that that child needs to be adopted? You have to have a ability to triangulate information, and there to be a means for there to be a break in the financial gain from that child being adopted.
What country were you in?
It was the Democratic Republic of Congo. We work in the Republic of Congo, which is a different country, but it's not unique. I thought it might be, and went deep into research. It's not unique to Africa, or it does come from this survival mode. So,
Myth or reality? Final. The problem is too big and there's nothing I can do. That's right. The reality is you are needed. Each of us have a really different way that we've come into this work, but we all started somewhere. And it all just started with incremental steps of learning more, diving deeper. We saw a problem. We wanted to be a part of the solution. And so we're going to share a little bit more of our stories. Wellen led the way and has probably some more to share too, but we'd like to share our stories as a way to link, this is a step all of us can take. Jennifer called us experts only because we've just been doing it for a while. But we have a lot more to learn.
Thank you, Audrey. That was wonderful. Every time she does that, we love all the information you learn, especially getting feedback here from the audience, too. So we're learning with you sometimes as well. But piggybacking after what Audrey just said, I want to ask each of you, and we'll deviate yours a little bit. So let's start with Alex. How did you get involved with responding to human trafficking?
Yeah, that's a good question. So kind of a little backstory. I've been with A21 a little over, right around 2 years, but before that, my background's banking. And so numbers and statistics, I just plug me in and I could do that all day. And so I had a really very blessed career in commercial banking, but before that, I come from a very agriculture family. My family are cattle farmers out in Columbiana. So not far from y'all. And so anyways, so we grew up, I got 5 sisters. I'm the only boy, never been married, no kids. Yeah, I know. And so in our family, I took being a big brother to heart. And so my youngest sister, after my parents couldn't have another boy, on child number 6, they decided to name her after me. And so I took that as a big honor. Well, when she was 14, she was raped violently by a family that we did farming with, that we grew up with their kids. We did everything with them. And so where she had a you know, she had her belief, like she had her church community, her family community, her friend community. She was raped over and over and over and always was told, if you tell your family, I'll kill them. And so she held that in until one day it exploded. And I saw the vicious cycle that it did in her life, where she felt like she was damaged goods, that no one would ever want her, an eating disorder. It's just a cyclical cycle. And so me and her would go on walks in the morning before I'd go to work and just talk and just be like, I don't know what you're going through, but I can be here for you. And so I called my best friend, that's our Southeast Asia director, and I was like, man, I need prayers and just healing. I need it for her. And he was like, hey, this aligns with your values. Come join the fight. And so from there on, I was like, I'm going to be a voice for those that don't have a voice. And ever since, I've been in the fight, and it just shows you kind of back to what you said, like, we can all do something. It doesn't have to be as extreme of giving up your career or what, fill in the blank, but we can all do something to be a voice for those that don't have a voice.
Absolutely.
Oh.
Thank you for sharing that, Alex. All right, Alexa, how did you get involved in responding to human trafficking?
These are such hard questions to answer because they're such a big answer sometimes. But briefly, my name means defender of mankind, and I always took that very, very serious. I'm from a Greek family, so it was talked about, and you have the big fat Greek family stuff. My dad was an Alex, and my mother would tell me, bring home the worst children from school because I didn't like people picking on them, and they were not clean, and I didn't like that people said ugly things to them. There was trauma in our family. My dad was an alcoholic, and he had cancer most of my life. I had a baby sister that I had to raise because of that. That's 9 years younger than I am. And my mother was only 32 when he died, and I was 15. So that tells you a whole lot right there. I kind of ignored. I knew that God had a plan. We all have a purpose in life. I want y'all to know that, number one. We have a purpose and a plan for our lives, and we need purpose. And so scooting through a lot of different things, I ended up having a systemic lupus, and I was very, very sick and told I wasn't going to live. And then I got Guillain-Barré, and lots of weird stuff happened, and I stopped. And I questioned, God, there's got to be more to my life than this. I have children. I'm 38 years old, and I'm looking out my bedroom window dying. And so there just was no more time to waste. And over the next 10 years, I kind of battled that. I had a great career with FedEx Kinkos and management and loved it. And then I went to Highlands College, which was a good thing. And sometimes I say, man, that turned my life around. And the thing I think that really was the catapult was I was working at the Dream Center. That was part of what I was supposed to do. And I was doing a reading program in Woodlawn with second graders. And had a little girl that would sit on my knee every day that I was there doing the program. I want y'all to know these kids would go without teachers sometimes because nobody wanted to step into those schools. There was truly would be a drug dealer outside of the school. They'd get put in jail, but then they were back out because it wasn't a federal crime. They didn't have enough. And it just blew me away because I believe you could pick yourself up by your bootstraps. And ladies and gentlemen, that's just a lie. You cannot if you don't have nothing else to turn to. And this little girl was at high risk for being trafficked, and her mom had already been picked up several times for what we would call prostitution, but God knows what she had been through. And she asked me if she could go home with me. And it changed my life forever. It broke me. I mean, I would wake up with nightmares, and God just wouldn't let me rest. And I went to the Los Angeles Dream Center and did some outreach on Skid Row there and saw even worse things. And there's sometimes there's a point in your life where you just can't turn your head any longer. And so I have to share this because of the faith that we walk in and the purpose. I was sitting on my back porch crying because my son was about to go to college, and I was going to have to tell him I don't have any money anymore. And I'm crying, and he's laughing. He goes, Mom, what's the matter? I said, I've done a horrible thing, is what I told him. A horrible thing. I said, we're going to start this nonprofit, and I'm not going to be able to pay for you to go to college. And this is how God works. He looked at me and he said, that's okay, Mom. I already knew that you were doing that before you did. He said, but I have a full scholarship to Troy University, plus a $5,000 grant for the Rotary, the Chamber and the Rotary and some other club that paid for his meals and his gas for a full year.
Wow.
So that's how God works, and I just want to leave y'all with that, to know you have a purpose. Doesn't mean you have to leave your job. You may just come and pray with us, but just be there, get involved.
Absolutely. Thank you, Lexa, for sharing that story. Well, and we went into part of your story, but do you want to elaborate a little bit more about how Moana Villages was formed and this whole connection?
Well, my husband, who was a lawyer, said, well, we stumbled upon Moana Villages, which was founded by a Canadian and Congolese couple, just a very, very grassroots means of supporting, a vulnerable family at a time, and they opened up their refuge when they saw that the primary orphanage in the city where we work, children were being trafficked right and left. You could go in and there was never any girl in the orphanage, and so opened up as a private, licensed but private, which protects from some of the government complicitness, I don't know what it is, of government corruption.
Yeah.
And when we stumbled upon them after our adoption experience, and we're going to watch how they make decisions for about 6 months, and truly was just blown away. The Lord was able to use our unique glimpse of international adoption to help advise Moana, for instance, zero money ever gained from adoption, and so all that to say, when we decided this is an organization we want to support, just because we can't keep it, we're not an ostrich with our heads in the sand, he said, well, why don't we just form a nonprofit so we can get a tax deduction for our support. So in 2011, we formed the 501c3, and we're still a grassroots organization, but we have a national support base that is learning more and supporting what ethical orphan care looks like.
Thank you for sharing that. Audrey, what about you? How did you get involved in responding to human trafficking?
When I graduated from university, if you can tell by my voice, I'm not from these parts. But I went to the University of Delaware. I'm a northerner, and I went and lived abroad after I graduated and served as a youth minister in a church program for international students. And what is very nice about international students is they go away during the summer, so I had my summers off. And I started volunteering one year at a children's home in Portugal for orphans. It was very small, and we brought the organization I was a board member with, our focus was helping orphans and widows and being a part of God's movement to help orphans and widows and stand for them. So we started working at this orphanage, and by being there all summer, we learned that the children were being used for pornography and prostitution. And it was it was a boy, a little boy who was 9 years old, that was our first kind of survivor victim that was rescued during that time. And of course, child abuse didn't surprise me, but that it was a Christian home and that it was happening to someone I knew really, really impacted me. It took 2 years to close the home down. So kids were still living in that environment for a long time because the legal system is slow. And the kids were not all from Portugal, so it was complicated and convoluted. So during that time, we hired an ombudsman to help process the legal needs that were in a foreign state, because we weren't Portuguese citizens. But we started doing a deep dive. This was all the way back in 2003. So human trafficking wasn't talked about too much back then. It was a reality. It just wasn't, those two words didn't go together that often. So we started exploring, okay, where are children and women the most vulnerable? Orphans and widows. This is the issue that is affecting orphans and widows. So where are they the most vulnerable? And where are little to no other resources or organizations working because it's either too dangerous or too expensive or too remote for most organizations to want to go. I was working for a pioneer woman who liked to do things the hard way, so she chose the most difficult place to go, which was Sudan and South Sudan. a ministry partner said, if you want to go where trafficking is the worst, you need to come to Sudan. It was during the height of the Darfur genocide. And unfortunately, that genocide is continuing today, and war in Sudan is ravaging the country, mostly because of economic gain. So we started working in those two countries because we wanted to stand with those who didn't have anyone else to stand with them. We started small, and the way that we work is we partner with local leaders who also have a vision and a heart for standing against oppression and standing for those who are the most vulnerable to it. So prevention is always our focus because I've seen the other side of it, and I don't want children to experience that heartache where possible. But the reality is safe houses are needed. And so we do both in our programs. We do welcome children that that have been rescued and are survivors of trafficking. We do provide employment for women that are survivors of trafficking, and their children can come to our schools. But we address it holistically because it's a complicated problem. So there's not just one solution, and that's why all of us are important, because there's just not one solution that's needed. And that's why all of you are important, because it's not just one thing. So it's a combination of really getting to the root causes of what makes someone vulnerable, and how do we create opportunities for thriving instead of exploitation, or empowerment instead of oppression. And so that's where my journey has been. It's been almost all of my career, and that's why my hair is white. But yeah, it's been an interesting, hard journey.
Thank you all for sharing your stories. You know, before we open this up for a Q&A, I'm just going to take a gamble here that most of you guys came here today because something has drawn you here, whether it be a person, work, something in your own life has brought you here today because your heart feels like you want to do something. Now, these guys are on the extreme side. They're in the thick of it. But me, like some of you, I'm here because my heart's here. You know, I'll share a little bit, just teeny bit of my own story. I first got exposed to trafficking when I worked as a Peace Corps volunteer in Kenya. And I was told of this little 4-year-old girl that her dad was helping his friends cure themselves of AIDS by selling his daughter as a virgin. I'll never forget walking into that room, and there was all these men sitting there like they were just having tea. And I had some people to translate for me because when I could speak some Swahili, but not when I'm nervous. It all turns into this mess of multiple languages. And this little girl came out. Her clothes were kind of ripped. You could see something was running down her leg. And these men, because the idea of a virgin and what it was didn't totally translate back then, were using this girl to cure themselves of AIDS. So they had infected this 4-year-old girl with AIDS. And of course, here's this white person, they'd call you a Mzungu, walks in and says, "Give me your kid." To this day, this is the dumbest thing I've ever done in my career. And of course, what happens? They say, "No, get out." And we literally ran out. You know, as I'm trying to figure out what to do next, and I was running a home-based care program, a hospice program for HIV/AIDS, people living with HIV/AIDS. They knew my route. So as I was walking, visiting my patients, they had slit this child's throat and sent her down the river so I would find her. That has impacted my whole life. And everything I do, if I'm not in the thick of it, I'm attached to it in some way, shape, or form, because we have to do this together to stop it. This little girl's name was Mercy. And I think about her all the time when I work, and everything I do is in honor of Mercy, because the one thing that child never got was mercy. But you guys are all here today. We have got these incredible experts up here, so what questions do you guys have for them? You know, you want to find ways to get involved, questions you may have about trafficking? We've got a few more minutes. Yes. Here.
North Alabama. I'm sorry. What are your connections in North Alabama like? We're all four from Huntsville. Mm-hmm. What can we do, I guess?
Yeah, so we worked some with Daystar, Church in Coleman. They're really in Coleman, not Huntsville, but we actually have volunteers from Huntsville that come in and volunteer with us. And We've done training in the Huntsville area, so one of the things we'd love to do is get connected with you and your folks, your church, or your clubs, and come in and do some training. That would be a great first start. We'd love to train.
Daystar is in Decatur, you said?
I think they're
Coleman.
Coleman. It's Coleman, yeah. Yeah, they've done a lot of good work. But the Huntsville area, there was that's where the North Alabama Human Trafficking Task Force is. That's the End It Alabama is in Huntsville.
What's it called?
End It Alabama.
End It.
End It.
ENDIT.
I've not heard of it.
They're kind of more over the summit, the Alabama Human Trafficking Summit, and there's not a lot of movement, I don't think, with trafficking in that area right now. But that would be a good way for us to connect, is to get in there and do some training. We'd love to do that, come up and talk to you about ways you could get more involved.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yes.
Okay, so I'm a director at a pregnancy center, and the first question I have is, do you have any agency close to South or Southeast Alabama?
Where in South Alabama? Did you say
Troy,
Yeah,
Dothan?
we do. We're partners with First Baptist Troy.
Okay, but I mean, like, the human trafficking.
Oh, Camille Place, yeah, they're in Monroe, Alabama, but that's even further down.
is that
south.
further
Yeah,
down?
that's further down. I think they're.
Yeah, that's Southwest.
That's, yeah. So our connection is with the church, and we have been there several times, twice this year already, doing
Right.
trainings and so forth, because we do some stuff with the college as well.
Okay.
And we do stuff with the pregnancy centers.
Well, when we talked at the meeting
Yes.
last month, and I thought about it, and I realized that it's bigger than, it needs to be more than just our pregnancy center there. So I've talked to my nurse manager, and what I'm thinking about and praying about is trying to get the chamber in on hosting an event that would bring together a lot of different agencies, DHR, police department, people from the
Great, and
campus,
church wants
and
to do that as well. You should talk with First Baptist Troy. They would love to open
oh
the
yeah,
church up
absolutely.
to have it.
My second question is, I was really concerned when you were talking about adoption agencies, because as pregnancy center directors, that's one of the options to abortions that we offer. So I'm not going to call any names, but what is the potential of that happening for real here?
All the time. We refused to sign an NDA following our process, but many families that have had an eye-opening experience are signing NDAs, so they can't talk openly about their adoption experiences. But I have had social workers, birth mothers who've made adoption plans, adoptive families, adoptees, have spoken with them about the prevalence of unethical, I'll say, practices in adoption agencies. I think that truly there has to be a heart that, it's reflected in Scripture. Like when you're caring for the widow and the orphan, they're together. So the heart has to be for supporting the mother and the child together where possible. And sometimes the mother has passed, but I think that model is there of support what is already there first. And so you do have, some agencies where their social workers' true heart is to come alongside that mom and get her the support she needs so that she can have the mental health care that she needs. She can have the economic opportunities that she needs. Because too often it does happen where, there may be counseling around that, but really they've got, white Christian families who just want a newborn baby, and there's an incentive for that, that child to end up, the mom making an adoption plan for her. And so I think that it has to start with the people who are counseling her to genuinely, and unbiased try to support that to happen. And sometimes that doesn't happen. I for sure am not saying no adoption should happen. It's just very sticky.
Well, a great idea would be to have this whole panel to come there, because, Troy's got a huge international presence. Troy University has a huge international presence. The They have DHS in there, they have police departments in that church, they do a lot with college. They would be happy, and they would bring in all these, and I would love for us all to be able to be involved in something like that. Because I think you did this was big, some different stuff.
One point we haven't made yet is there's actually a whole other group of us that weren't able to make it today. So we've got people that are working with, I know Lutheran Family Services is about to change, but with kids being smuggled or trafficked in. One of our girls is part of the panel. She wasn't able to make it today. We have one working with Freedom Business Alliance. He was not able to make it today. So we can bring in different faces with enough time, and that you can get the whole gamut of what's happening in the world of trafficking. And that's kind of why we all formed, because it's so different, but there's still that underlying symmetry, like that it all relates back to. Oh, she's bringing you the mic.
I have specific things to offer for us to do in addition to giving money to whichever one of these. Because before, when I've looked into human trafficking and read about it, watched the videos and all that kind of stuff, really the only option was to give money to and I'm not going to South Sudan, so I understand that. But still, it seems like there's something else that we could be doing, since we're kind of doers. I mean, and so I don't know. Is that part of it?
I think that's a really good question. So, and y'all could probably go off of this as well. So my primary job with A21 is to bring awareness throughout the Southeast. And when I took this on, when I left corporate America and I came on for A21, I was like, man, I cannot wait. Like, you give me statistics and data, I will probably bore you to death. And so I'll never forget, my first meeting I went to was in a little town in Tennessee. And it was, God revealed a lot to me that day. But the thing is I went in there, it was a potluck lunch. I went in there and I was like, all right, this is what's happening in our community. Here's the data. I got ran out of town. I didn't even stay for the potluck. So it made me so aware. I mean, like, you would have thought I ran over their puppy. But it brought to me where I think I told you this, I'm very passionate about being from Alabama, but I know that we are so far behind, like me. So it just makes me realize that the biggest thing that we can do as a group, as an individual, is to the people we know in our circle be like, hey, look, I know these people that do counter trafficking. I can get them to come to us and tell my group of influence what's going on. Because our thing is the money will come. But bringing awareness, we have far and few between opportunities to capture those moments and to bring education and awareness. So I would say the biggest power y'all have is, who do you know that should hear about what's going on in our community, what's going on globally, because what their two specialists is international. What's happening internationally?
And it's affecting you too.
Yeah, it's coming. Like, they're more advanced internationally since it's been going on for so much longer, that when it finally does catch up to the U.S., it's even more catastrophic. And so my biggest thing is, who do you know that needs to know us and that we can come speak to and educate?
Well, y'all are invited to
Just no pot lunch.
Okay, so you're saying this group, what are y'all? I mean, are you, like you said, this is your group,
Yeah.
more, so is
Yes.
it GAAB?
It is GAB.
That's what it is.
Yes, ma'am. It's an.
What exactly are y'all?
What exactly is our mission statement? So yeah, we are a global. So our name means a global anti-trafficking alliance, Birmingham. So the idea is people in the trafficking industry, or working in trafficking in the Birmingham area, for us to come together with all of our specific, areas, interests, or whatnot, and collaborate together to spread awareness. Our whole goal is to do stuff like this and to tell people what it looks like here, across the nation, across the world, so that everyone can be educated, because we believe unless we all know what's going on and take whatever step we can that we feel God's pushing us towards, until that happens, we won't end this. But together we can.
So there's no other, city that has what y'all have?
Not that we're aware of yet.
I don't think it's in Huntsville,
Yeah, no, it was a brainchild of all of us coming together saying, where is it? But we would love for this to expand. We'd love to mentor other groups. We'd love for this to grow. We want stuff like collaboration, just like what Kevin does, and he's also the reason why we're here too. Bringing people together that are like-minded, that want to make a change, that is where difference happens. And we want to make more of it. Hill.
It's Hill. My parents made it very easy. 4 in the front, 4 in the back.
And I think in response to your question, one of the things that I think is important is that it can't just be on the nonprofit sector to fix this problem. The business sector, the church sector, and the government sector all have to be working together before we're actually going to really see significant change happen. So the more we can get those kinds of leaders in the same room talking about these kinds of issues, the better off we're going to be. A question for you, Alexa. How many residential facilities are in Alabama that help people who have been trafficked?
Right now, I know of 3 that are in Alabama.
And what are they? They're yours?
Mine, the Well House, and Camille Place. Camille Place just focuses on children. We just focus on children. The Well House does adults and children.
Okay.
Where are they located? Monroeville is Camille Place, and Well House is
Pell City-ish?
Well, no, they moved in Springville.
Springville. Okay, oh yeah.
You do? I think so, yeah.
Okay.
That's right.
Sharing your experiences, because you never know who may have those same experiences. Provide resources and give education. You have to do it across the board, from nonprofit to profit. You can't just stop those people that you see. That's how people do it. That's a part. It doesn't matter. Organic. My coworkers are often saying, she's so crying. Get your
Yeah.
And I am, because it's, the things that we do are such hidden, they're hidden secrets that we have to expose in order for people to support.
Well, I think piggybacking off what you said when you asked about the agencies, I think we can all say this, is we're already all full. We're not even open yet, and we already know that 10 bedrooms or 9 bedrooms in Houseplex is gonna be too small, so that's why we're getting our placement agency license as well. But it's just not enough. It's not enough.
I mean, yeah, if you feel the call to foster care, that is a big problem too, is finding out of in-home placements. So what are they considered? It's a different trauma license, right? Or
Yeah, so we're getting our CPA, but we will then, once we get our child placement agency license, which has already been applied for, and we're almost done with it, we will then apply for therapeutic foster homes as well, just so that, because there's not one in Shelby County, and the therapeutic can house one if we have extreme trauma. But through our training, we can use regular foster families, but it's going to be an additional 30 hours training through us, and then another 30 through DHR, and then we will case manage those homes.
And I'll just name that focuses a lot on the aftercare side, but there's prevention side that everyone's churches and organizations can also take part in. So if you are food delivery services or making food available, because food security is a critical component of preventing trafficking. Economic development opportunities and creating fair jobs, that's a critical component to prevent human trafficking and for aftercare. So there are other ways too that you can be a part of caring for survivors, but also caring for people before they're survivors. And so all of our agents, all of your workforces and our church activities, our social activities can be a part of that too. And so it's really discerning, and I think all of us discerned uniquely where God was opening doors for us to take a step, and then another step, and then another step. And so just following that through, diving deeper into the rabbit hole of what human trafficking is, because it's complicated and complicit. And so understanding more and more about, okay, I'm going to take a stand here today. I'm going to shop ethically, or I'm going to look for who makes my shrimp and where I can get good quality shrimp that slave labor wasn't a part of, or all of those things. Those are small steps, but they're also really critical steps. So think through that too as you invite the next step for your journey of taking a stand here.
And I also want to say that the reminder that this is a spiritual issue, that there is a world system that is fighting against the kingdom of Jesus, and the entrenchment of lie-based thinking and the use of people in evil ways is definitely one of those principalities, powers, forces of darkness that's so evidenced in what we do, and that there is a spiritual reality that says Jesus is the victor over all of those things. He is the king over all other powers, and that we need to be thinking about this additionally through the lens of the victory of Jesus and encouraging people to trust him, believe him, and walk by faith in the kingdom principles that lend toward peace and stability and shalom in people's lives.
I know.
I have like 4 different questions, so I'm sorry. I'm also with, I'm with Life on Wheels, and we are pro-life, and it's the same issue for adoption. Is there any agency in particular that we need to focus more than others? I mean, it's just, if we all care for these babies and these women, if I'm going to serve them, I just don't want to give them a solution that is not a solution.
Right.
Right. Our mission is to serve women first, then save babies, and then share Jesus. But I want to make sure that I'm not going to put them in another position.
Right. I think the world of GAAB of Central Alabama.
Okay.
I think they have wonderful, God-fearing, trained, passionate social workers that work with them. And I think they are, and they're not just, they're based out of Montgomery, but have a Birmingham office. And I think that they can operate anywhere in the state. So I think that they're a great partner for you guys. GAAB of Central Alabama.
Yeah. Another question, have you seen more illegals now? 'Cause, I had a case last Wednesday, and it was a language barrier, and she was clear a victim of human trafficking. And it was, I'm not going to get to details, I don't want to get emotional, but I couldn't help her. It was bad. And she was just one of the many, and I'm thinking, have you seen an increase in, immigrants right now with a problem at the border, or not really?
It's been ongoing. I'll let Alex.
It's out of control.
Yeah.
It's speaking of Polaris, they have a heat map of the United States of reported cases, and I think on the heat map it's just like from 2021, 2022, so it's a couple years outdated, and it's like 19,000, majority in the South compared to the U.S. And they're saying for every one reported, there's 10 cases that aren't being reported. And so if you look at it, and that's why I try to tell people also in the South about the illegal immigration stream, it's so crazy out of control now. For instance, you have, and when I try to tell people, it is here in the South, and it is rampant. You got Atlanta Airport's #1 in the United States for trafficking. You got, it remains in the top 3 in the world. You got 3 major interstates that are in the top 5, I-20, 459, 65. They always stay in the top 5. Florida, #3 in the Union. At Orlando, #1, it goes between #1 and #2 for missing migrants.
And I know we work with PICA. Are you familiar with PICA? It's the
Yes.
Hispanic
Yeah.
Coalition.
Yes, we call them, but I'll go to another question. Is there a way, like, it's just, I'm not going to get into details, but is there like a waiting list for someone to be helped? And this is very naive, but my first case of human trafficking, she looked at me after ultrasound, after everything. She was pregnant, and then she told me, I am a victim of sex trafficking and I need help. So very naive, and being from a different country, I thought I'll call this number, SWAT team will come, save her, and happily ever after. And no, it was, we couldn't find her a bed. We couldn't get help.
Her age too. What was her age?
I don't remember exactly, but 30-something and pregnant.
That the problem is no man's land, 18 to 19, 20, 21. You know, that's a very difficult age for people to face this week. Like, we only go to 18 until we all open these foster homes and get out older. And then if they're pregnant, it even has a different look to it because, like, we would take a child, you had a child, but we would place the child, the baby, in one of our foster homes. They wouldn't stay on campus with us.
Lutheran Family Services might be another resource for you. One of the women is on our panel. She's not here today, or she's in our group, but they might have additional resources. They deal with a lot of smuggled and trafficked children and families through their organization. And do you have anything? Okay. But also, we're going to start listing everybody's connections on our website, on our Facebook page. So link up with us on Facebook or LinkedIn. It'll also start giving those resources to you as we develop them and what we have existing. Uh-huh.
Yeah, I'm a partner at the Lifeline, and I quoted you and got a response about Lifeline. It says, your statement was pretty broad, because I quoted your statement. This is why so many African programs have been shut down. We have a number of safeguards in place. He talks about accredited partners. Then he says, we also are closely connected with in-country staff. We visit often and have strenuous vetting process. And that's from the VP of Church Partnership. So I'd like you to invite, I think you need to invite the International Adoption Christian organizations to these type of panels so that there can be some discussion, because I can tell you Lifeline is doing great work.
So this is a different kind of question. So we saw or see a lot of immigrants. They're coming over, they can't speak English, and we're finding they're coming through Chile, then to Mexico, then into the United States, and they've been brought in because they had the dream is going to happen. You know, they're going to come in, they're going to give them a job, they're going to do whatever. In this one case that we're looking at right now, a young mother has come in with her 2-year-old, and she was picked because she was a young mother with a 2-year-old. She came into the States. She was first put in a home with 10 other families.
Oh.
And then from there, she was, I assume, sold to her husband. That's supposed to be the guy that's like her husband. She is not convinced that she's part of trafficking. She thinks, oh, he's just taking good care of us. She don't realize that her child is probably being groomed. How do we convince them when we're talking to them that this is just not normal? That, you know, because they're coming for a better life. You know, like she seriously. Yeah. So like we just have a short window. I'm from a pregnancy center, so we have, you know, maybe 30 minutes with her to convince her, you know what, this is not normal behavior. He comes with her. She don't know where she lives. She don't know her birthday. She don't have a phone. She don't have any of these things. He will bring her every month to get supplies that she needs. Our only thing is, oh, can we bring you back and talk to you? And we bring her back each time and talk to her, even though we don't really have to do that. But we have several that'll show up to do that. They tell them, well, I have to go back every month. And so they'll wait in the lobby and wait on them, but we can't convince them. They're over 18, so we can't convince them that they need to report this, that we could help you if you would let us help you. But then again, just like she said, we say we can help, but then we really can't. Our hands are tied. So
congratulations for recognizing that. I'd like to say thank you for that, because we have a lot of issues with that, like in emergency rooms too. So thank you for going the extra mile and recognizing that and loving your patients like that. There's really not a great answer for this, unfortunately. You can't make somebody understand that they're being trafficked. That you just can't, and that's why there's a lot of runaways, even when you're in a group home or where people are caring for you, because that's what you think your life is supposed to, especially somebody that's coming from another country. I think we need to. I'd love to hear what you've got to say. Do you have any thoughts on that, or?
Yeah, and I think one of the myths and realities was people always want to be rescued. And that's not the reality. Is there's a lot of reasons why people are in situations that they're in. And I think that, just to clarify, the training that she was naming was for your practitioners. So not for the time-sensitive young woman that you have, but just having the resources available and offering is the problem is so large, and it's so complicated, and it's so complex. It's a very complex issue. And there's not one approach that's going to work for every one person. We just keep on looking for the opportunities to make a difference. And it's really one at a time. And that's the heartbreaking reality.
It's really sad because in this particular case, she always says, "Oh, but he's so nice to us. He's so good to us. He's not mean to me," and but she is still performing like his wife or whatever, and he's taking care of us, but she doesn't really see it, you know what I mean? And she feels like it's better than maybe the situation she came from. We do have people on staff that are from Colombia and Guatemala, and they talk about, tell them, that's not right, but that they just can't see it. And we've even called the police before. They say, yes, I want to tell somebody. And we bring the police in the back door, the guys in the front door, and when they go in to talk to the girl, she's like, no, that didn't ever happen. No, he's good to me.
Yeah. We call that the lover boy.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
there's been many cases like that.
I think that, and I think the term we probably all, the mail order bride thing, and that culture, we don't see it as a form of trafficking, even though it is. And so it's education and figuring out better resources. Maybe it's legislation. We've talked about that before. Do we need to expand mandated reporters? Right now it's just children. Like, do you do it in these situations? Would they act? And that's what this panel also wants to kind of tap into as we find solutions or hear problems and find solutions, is what else can we do if we can get the legislators in here, if we can get the businessmen, if we can get the ministers, we all work together and say, you know what, this is a problem. We've got these girls, these women that are being sold to these men, and they have nowhere to go. Like, because if they don't disclose, there is nothing for them to do.
It was really heartbreaking that they picked, she was like, she felt like she got picked. They told her like she could get here and they wanted to do better for her because she was a single mom with this child. And they, so it made you feel as though they're getting the child ready and be grooming like you had talked about someone is. That's just, it's heartbreaking.
What would be some signs you would see in the children? Maybe you guys can respond, because the child is something you can act on. Maybe you guys can talk about some of the signs that you see in children that are being groomed.
Yeah, so one of the things is it depends on how the child is too. That's a whole other thing, but personality change, of course. How the child is dressing, if they're trying to wear long sleeves in the summer or long pants because maybe they're trying to hide trauma to their body, or they talk about their personal parts hurting, even hard to go to the bathroom. You notice tattoos or bruising, those kinds of things you can always look for, because lots of times the children are marked because they belong to someone. And you not really are going to recognize a change in personality, but somebody that's just coming in there briefly, and it's not coming in there often. But how they're dressed lots of times is a telltale sign. They're trying to cover stuff up, or if they're constantly sick. They're just, one of the things we talk about is where they're disjointed from anything that you're either talking about or doing. Why are they so disjointed with what's going on? There's a reason for that, why they're not participating in the conversation. But even at that, the problem with the law is, if that's the problem we have with children even testifying. And I know you've experienced some of this too, but if the child is so afraid of testifying, so there's not a case that they will, even though they have proof in their body, there's not a case that they will testify. So we're losing kids left and right just because of that.
Anything else? Okay. Wonderful. We want to thank you guys all for coming too. If this is your arena, come up here and talk to us. We're always growing the panel. Or if you want to be a part of it, come be a part of us. You don't have to be working for one. I'm prime example. I run a scholarship program. That's my day job. But this is the other stuff I do. But we want everybody that has a heart and a passion for this to come link arm with us, because this is how the change starts happening when we all work together. Come to cause conversations, invite us to come speak. We've got more. Like I said, we'll be putting everybody's profiles on Facebook pages soon. Fortunately, this is busy season for all of us, and they put me in charge of media, so that's the big problem. Yes. No, I'd love it. If you guys have if you haven't gotten information on any of these groups, some of them have booths ready. If they don't have a booth, they're also up here. Come and talk to them, ask them your questions. Take the GAAB handout. It's the quickest way to get a hold of any of us. But I want to thank you all for coming today, and let Kevin say a word before we head out.
Father, thank you for this afternoon and for the opportunity we've had to learn more about these issues. Thank you for the way you have spoken to us. Give us a takeaway. Help us to walk away with some action, something that you offer us to do to deal with this issue. May you bless us as we go, walk in the heart of Jesus to stay with today.
Y'all take food home to your
Oh yeah,
families.
please take food.